us on this Saturday. How has it been this offseason being a Pittsburgh Steelers beat writer?
Man, it's been a very bizarre experience. And I know everyone in Pittsburgh is definitely a little bit tired of it. And it's gotten to the point where, it's first day of OTAs. You kind of have to write about the quarterback. And all the comments in my story are like, man, we're just sick of this guy. We're tired of it. And that's one thing I don't think that Aaron Rodgers realizes with all this is, there are going to be a portion of fans that are skeptical of what he can bring into Pittsburgh because of the fact he's 41 years old, because of the fact that he went, 5-12 last year with the Jets. But those people who were optimistic and willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think a lot of those have gone the other direction. And now we're critical and don't even want Aaron Rodgers right now. So it's creating an interesting dynamic here in Pittsburgh where, at some point, everyone thinks that he's going to sign. They're not sure. But I really wonder what the reception is going to be in Pittsburgh. And this is a city that Pat Narduzzi, the Pitt football coach, he calls it Boo City because this fan base has turned on its own. First with Ron Hextall, the GM of the Penguins. They've chanted Fire Canada at Penguins games. So if things don't go well for Aaron Rodgers, I really wonder what kind of reaction it's going to have from the fan base.
Yeah, Mike, I don't cover the Steelers, and I'm not a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, but I'm already exhausted from this Aaron Rodgers thing. So I can imagine what you and everybody over there who are lovers of the Steelers are going through, man. It's one thing to get into this negotiation with Aaron Rodgers at some point, right? I mean, obviously there's interest there between both sides of it. But then also, too, if you're the Steelers, knowing your history as an organization, are you shocked, Mike, that the Steelers are really, as we see this, giving in to Aaron Rodgers and what has made him Aaron Rodgers in terms of forcing organizations, head coaches, teams to march to his beat of his drum instead of doing things the organizational way?
It is interesting for sure because there's many examples of the Steelers putting team first. I mean, it goes back to Franco Harris, who's beloved in Pittsburgh, produced one of the most legendary plays of all time with the Immaculate Reception. When contract matters didn't go well with him, he ended up leaving, and somebody asked Chuck Noll about him, and he said, Franco who? And the point being hey, we move on. We're the Pittsburgh Steelers, that kind of thing. And this is very un-Steeler-like. And I almost wonder, how much is Aaron Rodgers also setting the tone for this relationship and kind of being look, if you want me, it's going to be on my terms. I'm going to be doing things my way. I'm the quarterback, not I'm coming to the Pittsburgh Steelers doing what you tell me. So, it's an interesting approach, and it's created this very bizarre situation where we're in right now, where the Steelers need to significantly improve offensively, and they've been through 1 week of OTAs. They don't have a quarterback, and the number one wide receiver, DK Metcalf, wasn't there. So, it's optional, but still, this offense has been dragging down the highest paid defense for the better part of a decade. And, how are you going to improve if the quarterback and the starting number one wide receiver aren't there?
Okay, so Mike, what do you know about conversations that Aaron Rodgers has had with the Steelers, whether that be recently or even just going back a couple months when the talks first got started of, hey, Aaron Rodgers could be a potential fit in Pittsburgh?
Well, the Steelers have been confident throughout that Aaron Rodgers will eventually come here, but I think that even they are a bit surprised that it's dragged out this long. And some of the strongest words have come from Art Rooney II, who is the team president and owner. And going back to owners' meetings, now we're talking 2 months ago, he said, I think we're going to get a decision soon. Then at the draft, he said the same thing. Then a couple weeks ago at another owners' meeting in Minnesota, he said again, I think it's going to happen soon. So, the Steelers seem to be willing to be patient with Aaron Rodgers. I think they realize that, this was not a great quarterback class in free agency. This was not a great class coming out in the draft. And once some of these other options went elsewhere, it really was like Aaron Rodgers or Mason Rudolph. And at that point, I feel like they just decided, look, we're already pot committed at this point. Our chips are on the table. Let's just wait it out as long as it's going to take. At this point, I don't know if they expected it to take this long, but right now, I feel like they kind of have gone down this path long enough that they're willing to see it till its end.
Yeah, no doubt on that, Mike. And I think with Aaron Rodgers, he's allowed to do Aaron Rodgers things because he understands that the Steelers need him with the quarterback room that they have currently right now. So that's the tough thing about it. It's just like, I know you guys need me. I'm going to force you guys into just waiting for me and let me take my time.
He does for everything.
Right, exactly. It's so wild. But getting back to that quarterback room for this Steelers team, I mean, at some point they have to make a decision to say, okay, we're just going to move forward and not allow this thing to drag out even longer because you're starting to get closer, a little bit closer, not there yet. Still some time away from training camp, right? So when you look at the quarterback room, is it potentially Mason Rudolph as QB1 for this Steelers team if that's the decision by Mike Tomlin?
At this point, I wouldn't completely rule that out. I think that the Steelers would at least have a conversation about bringing in a guy like Kirk Cousins. I think they're willing to be patient with Aaron Rodgers, but they definitely have talked up Mason Rudolph a lot. And Mason Rudolph has had an interesting career with the Steelers because back when he was drafted in 2018, the former GM, Kevin Colbert, he was saying, like, look, there were some teams that had a first-round grade on this guy, so we're happy to get him in the third. And because of those statements, a lot of fans felt like maybe this is the heir apparent to Ben Roethlisberger. He sits for a couple years, learns, and when Ben moves on, then he steps up and takes his spot. And really, the opposite unfolded for Mason Rudolph. He ended up tumbling down the depth chart, ended up as QB3 behind Mitch Trubisky and Kenny Pickett, not necessarily two star quarterbacks. And it wasn't until the 2023 season, the Steelers season was in a tailspin, and Mason Rudolph came in, won 3 games in a row to get them to the playoffs. And I think that started to make the Steelers think a little bit differently about him. Now, I think he's a little bit better than QB3, but you look at what he did last year in Tennessee. He had a quarterback rating of 80. He had the same number of touchdowns as interceptions. So if you thought a couple years ago he was the third best quarterback on your own roster, how could he now be the best decision for you at quarterback? And I think, as much as fans want to get behind Mason, I think some of that's because they're sick of the Aaron Rodgers stuff. I just don't think the ceiling's very high for him. I think that maybe he could be a game manager, get them to another, classic Tomlin season. Maybe they preserve the non-losing season streak and finish right around 500. But if they're going to actually snap their postseason winless drought, which is now 8 seasons, and is a huge talking point here in Pittsburgh, they need quality quarterback play. That's been the reason why they've failed to win a playoff game more than anything else. And so, Mason Rudolph probably is not that guy, but he might end up having to be if Aaron Rodgers ends up, deciding to do whatever he'll end up deciding.
We're talking with Mike DeFabo, Steelers beat reporter for The Athletic. Mike, this Kirk Cousins conversation, if the Steelers do, in fact, decide to turn to Cousins at some point, what does that look like? What do they bring him in contract-wise, or when does that process start?
Yeah, some conversations that I've had, it sounded like things that I've heard within the organization, it sounded like at some point and at some price they would at least have the conversation. I don't know if they would actually pull the trigger on something like that. One of the biggest factors with Kirk Cousins is his contract. And so he's due $27.5 million this year. He also has a $10 million guarantee next year. So any team that acquires him, it's going to have to be a situation where the Atlanta Falcons eat a tremendous amount of that. And to this point, it doesn't seem like they're willing to do that. The way that I look at Kirk Cousins, like if the Steelers could get him in a similar scenario to last year with Russell Wilson, where the Denver Broncos were paying all but $1.2 million of that salary, it was kind of like a no-risk situation. And you said to yourself, yeah, maybe this guy isn't in his prime anymore, but we don't need him to be, and we're also not paying him anything near like an elite quarterback. So, I think that the situation would need to be kind of similar with Kirk Cousins, especially the way that things ended at the end of the year with him getting benched. He was playing some really poor football, turning the football over a lot. Looks like he had lost a lot of his mobility. So I would have my concerns on the field, and I would have even bigger concerns as it pertains to the financials. But if the Atlanta Falcons can sweeten it enough, maybe the Steelers would at least consider something like that.
Mike, as OTAs continue on across the NFL, when you look at the Steelers and just from what you've heard and what you've seen with this team, what has really stood out to you through these OTAs in the early part? And then also, what's the messaging that you're hearing from Mike Tomlin about this team, especially with certain areas that they need to grow and get stronger in?
Yeah, two big areas other than quarterback are offensive line and wide receiver. So, obviously the Steelers made a big move by going and acquiring DK Metcalf. But after trading George Pickens, really it's like there's DK Metcalf, a huge gap, and then a lot of question marks and maybe like intrigue and unknown. And one of the guys who's really an X factor is Roman Wilson for this team because, he was drafted in the third round out of Michigan. Very productive receiver there, track caliber speed, really good on slants and in-breaking routes. But he essentially redshirted last year because he got hurt the first padded practice, injured his ankle. That was during training camp, and then tweaked his hamstring and ended up really just being a lost year. So, if Roman Wilson steps up and hits the ground running, you're going to feel a lot more confident about that wide receiver group. If you don't, then you could start seeing why there's reports about Omar Khan inquiring about Jonnu Smith and, some other playmakers and pass catchers. So, I think that's a big talking point here in Pittsburgh is everyone knows what DK Metcalf can do, but if you're not throwing the football to DK, who is it going to be?
Mike, we appreciate your time, appreciate all of your insight. We wish you best of luck this season with everything that you and Pittsburgh Steelers fans are dealing with Aaron Rodgers, but should be a fun year regardless.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm probably going to need that, so thank you very much.
Meditation, Mike. You go through some meditation, man, and some breathing exercises just to get
That's right. Deep breaths, everyone.
Yeah.
Deep breaths.
We will talk to you again throughout the season, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much.
That is Mike DeFabo, covers the Steelers for The Athletic, and you can find him on Twitter at Mike DeFabo.